I was starting my New Year's resolution of getting into shape and started to go for 20-minute jogs around my neighborhood every night. I was on day 20 or so of my jog and was getting used to the trail that I took every time. It was a concrete path that goes along a big lake and around outside of my suburb. Most of the path is surrounded by trees and a parkland. I would usually run at night at around 9 p.m. because it's a lot cooler at night and I like the solitude. I would never see anyone at this time, and I've only seen one or two people the whole time I've been doing it. It does get a little bit creepy at times, as it is so dark. Usually, the only light source being the moon. But I never felt scared while running. But this night was different. I was running through part of the trail that has some public exercise equipment off the side of it, so I decided to stop and use it to burn some extra calories. I would do this often during my run. This particular exercise machine was for exercising your chest and was attached to a machine for exercising shoulders. After I had done my first set, I had to take a little break to get my breath back. Still sitting at the machine, it was deadly quiet. All you could hear were the insects from the nearby lake. After a second, I heard someone sit down on the shoulder machine directly behind me. It scared me and I suddenly got an overwhelming feeling of dread and anxiety. I never get scared or nervous easily, but this creeped me out, as I did not see anybody ahead of me on the trail before I sat down. I could see a good 50 meters ahead, so I would have seen someone coming. I also wondered why they wouldn't say hello or make themselves known to me. At this point, I noticed that all the insects in the area had gone quiet. This in itself creeped me out. I looked back to make sure someone was actually there, and there was a bald-headed man around 40 or 50 with perfect posture, just sitting in the shoulder machine, facing the opposite way from me. He wasn't wearing workout clothes and looked like he was wearing an old blazer. He kept looking forward and didn't acknowledge me at all. I'm a really logical person, and something about this situation didn't add up in my mind. I thought to myself that this guy was a serial killer and that there was no reason whatsoever why he would just be sitting there. There is also a park bench about 5 meters away that he could have sat on if he wanted a normal seat. So it wasn't because of that. I turned around and did one more set, as not to look freaked out. When I finished, I casually stood up and went to continue my jog, and I noticed the man was gone. I looked all around and he wasn't anywhere to be seen. There were a few treads scattered around the park, but other than that, there was nowhere else he could have gone at the time. I continued to jog up the path, partly hoping I could catch up to him, mainly because it would be better of him being behind me. I ran for 5 minutes and didn't see anyone. There was literally nowhere he could have gone unless he was hiding behind a tree or disappeared into thin air. After that, I head home. To this day, I have no idea who the man was, but I have 3 theories. 1. The man was a weirdo, trying to get a rise out of people and purposely snuck up on me and sprinted away behind a tree. 2. He was a ghost haunting the area, which is why he was wearing old clothes. Also, the park is really old and was one of the first places settled in Western Australia. I don't believe in this one that much. 3. He was a normal guy out for a walk that stopped for a seat who didn't want to talk, then so happened to walk off trail through the park perfectly being covered by each tree as I ran, creating a continuous blind spot where I couldn't see him. One year, a group of us went camping in Kearney, Ontario, where we always go camping. Whenever we go, we always form our tents in a big circle, with the fire pit in the middle of us. We've been drinking, smoking a few joints, and a few of us tripping balls on shrooms. The first night we were there, this guy randomly walks into our circle, introduces himself, I can't remember the name he gave, that he was in the military and decided to take some vacation to camp out a bit. He asked if he could join our fire, as it was getting late and he didn't buy any firewood. Being the friendly stoned people we are, we let him join our fire. He even pitched in some money for the firewood. The night went on, and we all were having a good time. One by one, our group started heading off to bed. Me being either the second or third. I remember waking up to the sound of someone talking and the fire being started. It was 4 in the morning. I peeped out my tent and saw the random just sitting on the log by the fire, talking to himself. Still tripping on shrooms, I thought to myself, I am in no condition to deal with this and chalked it up to me just tripping out. I wake up the next day and everyone is still alive, thankfully, and the fire is smoldering. We look at the campsite, where the random guy was staying, and it was spotless. No garbage, no tracks in the trail around the site, no nothing. We all started talking about him, just to be sure we all saw him. Through talking, we managed to figure out that he must not have slept at all, and the last two of our group passed out at 3:30 a.m. The first person got up just after 6 a.m. and noticed he was gone. The rest of the camping trip went well, and we all went home. Fast forward maybe 4 to 5 years, I flip on the news and there's this picture of someone I could swear I recognize. He was arrested for a bunch of crimes, including rape and murder. Guess who it was? It was the random guy who joined our fire. I don't know why I remembered his face, but I guess it was just a weird situation where my brain right-clicked, saved as a JPEG in my brain. Now, I have no way of proving it was the same guy. We didn't take any pictures of the random, but the picture jump-started my memory and made me instantly remember the weird random fire joiner. It started several years ago. My and my friends' interest in urban exploration. I was a junior in high school at the time, which was when everyone started to earn a lot more freedom, so we took the chance to be out late whenever we could. Now, keep in mind that I live in a major city in central Colorado, so the nightlife is never lacking. We could always find something to do, and we're especially drawn to the element of danger. We wouldn't always plan these trips, but we made sure as hell that if we were going in any old building in the dark, that we would have a knife and a flashlight for safety. But we never really had to defend ourselves, but we came very close one evening. It must have been around November, because there wasn't yet snow on the ground, but it was really chilly. Directly across the street from the abandoned hospital, which we have hypothesized is still around from the TB era, is a hospital that is newer and in use. The two are connected by an underground tunnel, which I can only assume was a way to move bodies without alerting the patients. This is common featuring among old hospitals. We have been inside there quite a few times. What was piquing our interest that night was the abandoned library next door to the hospital. It was connected, but only by exterior walls. To get inside, you could not cut through the hospital, but instead had to hop over a tall wall and climb over a very high fence. A few of us had backpacks containing the aforementioned safety precautions and a couple bottles of water, so nothing too heavy or valuable that would get damaged when we tossed it over the obstacle before us. A little ways off the road, it was dark. If you clung to the buildings, you did it for a while before stepping behind a patch of shrubbery, which we determined was an easy way to the first wall, since the only way to gain access was by a chained, unclimbable gate at the bottom of a set of stairs facing away from the ledge. Both were parallel with the library, so when tucked back in the corner behind the bushes, no one could see us from the street. I don't believe I went first, but I did not remain to be the last over that wall. It was too high up for me to jump and haul myself over, so I restored to stepping on a pipe, jutting out somewhere lower among the wall. It gave me a bit of a needed boost, and soon I was up and over. Moving into the library's courtyard, another girl and I waited for our two friends to get over and join us. Upon an initial glance over the courtyard, there was no obvious way in. To our right was a dilapidated fountain, which I took joy in imagining spring forward a spray of water from its detailed stonework in the brighter summer months. People laughing and talking, and the surrounding trees bringing them shade. Now, however, it had been in long disuse, and the earth at our feet was cold and hard. There were no signs of another soul for years, save the 15-foot chain-link fence directly in front of us separating the courtyard in half. I could tell you it hadn't seen the same weather at the rest of the courtyard because the metal showed no signs of rust. That must be our way in, we agree, because with a fence like that, someone obviously wanted to keep us out. We hurled our bags over the fence, hearing them clank on the ground, and rather silently due to their lightness. I was the third one over because I have a slight fear of climbing, and it took me a bit to mentally prepare myself. I made it to the top of the fence in short time. Then I sat atop of it, straddling it with my leg on either side. I was thinking that had to have been one of the scariest things I've ever been done in a while, because I tend to avoid climbing at all costs. Of course, this is an irrational fear, as I've never fallen, but that phobic fear didn't ever compare to what happened next. The last girl's feet hit the ground, and all four of us split up in a smaller half of the courtyard, looking for any kind of entrance. We decided that breaking a window would be too loud and draw unwanted attention. Not to mention, we could really get cut up. So that wasn't an option. Searching for a little longer, we didn't find anything that looked remotely plausible. Until we found a gate near the base of where the walls met. I couldn't believe we hadn't noticed it before, and upon closer inspection, the grate was already moved slightly from its resting place, so it would be easy to lift the rest of the way. The smallest and least fearful of our group went first. After moving the grate, there was a small drop down. It was no more than 3 feet down and 2 feet wide. But inside, there was another drop down where we could see into the library basement. She hopped out into the small, squared landing, only to almost immediately freeze. We looked among ourselves, wondering what was wrong. "There's a guy down here," she said. "Wait, where?" "I can see his outline," she said. I leaned forward and tried to take out a step, but I leaned forward and tried to make out a shape, but it was further down than my line of sight permitted and too dark. "Hello?" she called out. He responded the same, asking who we were. "Just a couple of chicks," she spat out bluntly. What he said next sent chills down my spine, and it was as if the feel of darkness radiating out of that hole in the ground. All of a sudden, it was very still and quiet, and the darkness had spilled out and weighed all over us. He said, in what I can only describe as a lustful tone, dripping with all intent, "I'm addicted to following the sound of women's voices." My friend looked over at us blankly, but there was nervousness underneath, unease, and something in his voice sounded like it wasn't an empty threat, like he wasn't just saying something creepy to get us to leave. She looked back to where he was and said lowly, "That's not cool." The man under the dark earth began laughing maniacally, and not in the kind of way a really good actor does, in the way that you could feel his utter insanity hit us like stale air. We looked at each other for what felt like hours in the gloomy courtyard, but I knew it was only a couple of seconds, because we all exchanged without even speaking that we had to get out of there, and now. I was not about to risk some nutcase coming after us, even if we did now. The friend scrambled up out of the landing, and I was never over a fence faster in my life. 15-foot potential fall, and I didn't even take the time to think about it. We didn't stop running until we were halfway down the streets, down the block, and out of breath. I can still hear that laugh. About 2 years ago, on a summer day, my dad and I went for a quick hike on the hills that overlook our city. On the hills, there are many reservoirs, many of which are surrounded by the woods of fir trees and are places of great beauty and quiet usually. The particular reservoir we were hiking to provided us wonderful views of the city, and we knew the route well. However, since we had been hiking in the late afternoon, we only had an hour or so before dusk set in. We decided to walk fast. We trekked up the pebble path from the bump gate that loops around the reservoir. You can't actually see the water until you've scaled a small mound in front first. Well, Dad and I were nearing the mound, heading towards the water, when things got really strange. This man, probably in his 20s, was running barefooted and shirtless along the mound from one side to the other, back and forth, over and over again. Huh, I thought, that's odd. Yes, it was summer, but where I live, summer is not a guarantee of warmth. So, even though it was August, there was still a sharp chill in the air. Plus, we were quite a few feet up to the rush of winds and have made it too cold to run half naked like this. Maybe he was doing it all for a thrill, or maybe he was hammered. We didn't stay long enough to find out. As we approached the water, a good distance from the odd runner, we could see the remnants of a fire ahead of some fir trees. Then ashes, sands were littered in strips of burnt foil, and realized there must have been some drug use here. We thought that might explain our runner friend over there. The man was utterly oblivious to us, so we passed by, and he seemed harmless enough. But when we were behind the woods, climbing over the rocky pathway, we saw another man, stumbling and blinking like a drunk. His clothes were filthy. His general appearance was unkempt. He looked rough, and he'd probably been sleeping that way too. Perhaps he'd even been camping on the hills. I was a little uncertain, to be honest. This man stank of alcohol, seemed to be doused in stuff, and he was grumbling to himself as he lumbered by. I worried that he was drunk enough to give us a hassle, perhaps even follow us about. He looked at me oddly, in a way that made me extremely uncomfortable, and I just wanted him to get away from me. Thankfully, he passed us slowly without any issue. I started to breathe normally again, but I was still on high alert. When we came around the reservoir through another bump gate, we noticed that the runner was gone. Didn't understand this as I'd only seen him 5 minutes ago or so I looked around and tried to spot the man himself or his clothes, as I was curious about him. He'd been acting really weird, like he was completely out of it. So I was peering through trees, trying to peek over the reservoir mound. I even looked behind me, up onto the hill. In case he had snuck by us, it was climbing up and I didn't see him. We were passing through the gap between some trees, and I was looking into the woods to see if I could find the runner between the firs. But then I saw something and stopped. And not just something, but someone. Someone sitting amongst the trees with dark eyes and face. Eyes that glared at me. What the hell? I was close enough to see that the lurker was a man. His clothes were baggy and his hair was long. I couldn't see his face too well, but I could see his mouth open and I stared closely. It was like he was snarling at me, like a vicious animal. I was thinking to myself, what the fuck is he doing in the trees? He was crouching about 50 feet from us, quiet and alone. It occurred to me that he may have been the runner, but I soon realized that it couldn't have been the runner, because the runner returned, jogging along the mound about a minute later. The drunk we had passed had gone in another direction, and I hadn't seen anybody else up there. So it was really creepy to just see this person sitting there, walking amongst the trees. I tried to pretend that I hadn't seen the creeper in the woods and continued walking. My heart rate was accelerating and my head gathered a cool sweat. The thought of him just watching us made me shiver. At least, my dad was with me. Walking back seemed to take an age, and my nerves made it difficult to move. I was tempted to look back round, but I didn't want him to know that I'd seen him, in case he'd panicked and took action. It was getting pretty dark now, and Mr. Lurker about twice as scary, so I wanted to get away from them all the weirdos, even the seemingly harmless ones. Back in the car, I told my dad about the men in the trees. He hadn't seen them. I don't know if my dad truly believed me. Perhaps he felt like I was exaggerating and the supposed malicious intent on the creep's face. But I swear he was scowling and snarling slightly at me. It was freaky. I'd never gone to this part of the hills late again. Due to this experience, it is truly a beautiful spot and I love going there, but I guess you could say it's pretty dodgy around dusk. I was backpacking in Arkansas, the Eagle Rock Loop in the Washita National Forest. There's a section of the trail that goes through an area called the Albert Pike Recreation Area. In June of 2010, a flash flood killed 20 people, including men, women, and children. There's a ton of stories online about this event if you want to look it up. So I start my trip at Little Missouri Falls, going counterclockwise. It's 26 miles with some pretty good climbs. You can find a map of the loop on Google Images. So I hiked a fairly long day. If you Google Eagle Rock Loop map, you will find a basic sketch map, not the topo map, just one of the basic ones with the labels of the trails, mountains, and water crossings on Pinterest. At the bottom of the map, there's a single water drop with a yellow circle around it. This just means it's always a wet crossing. There are several yellow circled water drops. The single one at the very bottom right next to the Viles Branch Trail. That is exactly where I was camped, so anyone can go there if you want to look it up and see what I'm talking about. So, that is the Little Missouri River. The water is flowing away from Albert Pike. I'm maybe 4 to 5 miles downstream from where the flash flood occurred. Now, I don't know if this is significant or not to my story, but I'm not ruling it out either. I set up camp at about 4 p.m. for the day. This was November of last year. Fairly cold nights. It was about 26 degrees the night before. I was expecting another cold night in the high 20s. Not a lot of movement around there that night when it was cold. Most animals hunker down. I use a tarp where both ends are open. I have an inflatable sleeping pad and my 35-degree sleeping bag. Now, I'm set up on completely level ground. On my pad, on the tarp inside my sleeping bag, I quickly fall asleep around 10 p.m. after sitting around the fire. Everything is normal all evening, and all night for the most part. Now, you know when you're asleep and you fall in your dream? You get the sensation like you're falling in real life when you tense up and always wake up on impact. Okay, well, I was asleep and I get the sensation sort of where I feel like I'm being dragged out of my tarp by my feet. Except it wasn't by my feet, I was being pulled by my sleeping bag. Like my whole pad with me in it suddenly being dragged out quickly. I woke suddenly as it startled me. Keep in mind, it was really cold, low 30s to high 20s at this point, and I have a 35-degree sleeping bag, so I'm inside my bag all the way with the top closed off by a shock cord. I'm completely inside my bag covered to stay warm. Now, I'm wide awake and listening for any movement. Everything is still and quiet, except for the river next to me, obviously. That is the only sound I can hear. I didn't peek out my head. I just laid there awake and listening. I sat there for a good 15 minutes listening for any sound outside of the river. I never heard anything. Granted, the river is pretty loud being right there, but there was no movement around my camp at all. So I chalked it up to having that falling sensation when you dream. I figured I must have been dreaming about something and it made me feel like that I fell or something. I went to sleep for 30 or 45 minutes longer, still keeping my ears open but figuring I was probably just dreaming. So for the most part, I just shrugged it off and put my mind off of it and got back to sleep. Morning comes and I get up and put my shoes on and roll out of bed. I head straight over to the fire to put it and stoke at the fire for first thing because it's definitely cold outside at 6:30 a.m. this morning. I turn back towards my tarp and head over to get my food hanging close by. That's when I noticed it, and I froze. My pad and sleeping bag at the foot end are sticking out from under my tarp, by a good 1.5 feet at least. I can think about how now, as I felt being dragged out from under my tarp the night before, staring at how my bed is from under the tarp. I slowly approach the tarp and look for any sort of footprints. The problem is I don't even see my own because the ground is so compact around there. I double check and I'm not in any sort of slope at all. The ground is completely flat. I really have no idea how this happened, and I know I was startled awake by that sensation of swiftly sliding down the hill towards my feet. My pad with me in it was being dragged out. I quickly had breakfast, tacked up and headed out. I was supposed to spend one more night on the trail, but the longer I hiked, the more I thought that what would happen the next night. These thoughts running in my head the entire day as I walked. Could it have been another person? I didn't hear anything. Why would anyone do that to anyone else? How could I have slid down so far? Maybe it was an animal. It couldn't have been. There were no punctures in my mattress and there were no footprints anywhere. Did I just slide throughout the night with restless sleep? It doesn't make any sense. I normally sleep on a slight incline, and I've never slid outside of the tarp before. Was this paranormal? I'm not far from Albert Pike. Could this been some sort of ghost trying to save me from a flash flood horror that it was reliving over and over? All day long, the same things were running to my head. I ended up hiking to my car and sleeping in there that night. The Athens Big Fort Trail was very tough going up over 6 mountains. It was almost dark after I descended the last one. I hiked the last 3 or so miles by headlamp in the dark. I wasn't keen on sleeping on the trail another night after that. Truth is, I've been on that trail a ton and will for sure go back. I've been all over Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Around 750 miles and countless nights spent in the woods all over the place. I almost exclusively hike solo. I never carry a gun or bear spray. I don't carry a SAT phone or GPS transponder. That is the only weird and unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me regarding camping, backpacking, and the outdoors. On August 5th, 2001, on U.S. Highway 287, which is 31 miles west of Palestine, Texas, I was traveling westbound at 65 miles per hour when I saw what looked like a bear cub or a very large dog sitting in the middle of the road. I slowed down to 15 miles per hour. I hit my high beams and stopped about 20 yards away from the animal. With on my four-way flashers, turned on my interior spotlight. As I looked up, I saw a huge bipedal creature that I will call Bigfoot. They walked from the soft shoulder of the road to the animal in the road. As he, I am pretty sure it was a male, walked in front of my tractor, he shielded his eyes, not seemingly out of shyness, but more as an effort to protect his eyes from the bright lights. I reduced my headlights to a low beam, but decided not to turn them off as I was in the middle of the highway. I was doing my best to protect them by blocking the road with my tractor trailer. The big male went over to what I realized was a toddler. He grabbed his shoulder and attempted to grab the little one's arm. The little one scooted away like a child trying to get away from a parent that wants the child to go somewhere and the child doesn't want to go. The little one had greater agility than the big male. The little one squirmed, scrambled, and scooted further up the road where they were. Then, something caught my eye and ear directly next to my driver's window. I casually looked over, and within 2 feet of my face was a female. No doubt female. She had nursing breasts and extended nipples. Her eyes were almost even with my eye level. I measured it from where the top of her head came up to my mirror. It was 7 foot, 4 inches tall. The male was at least 1 foot taller than her, plus some. She had a gamey smile, but it didn't stink. Immediately upon seeing her, I smiled with all the teeth I have. From the interior spotlight, which was pointed down toward my lap, I am sure she was able to see me clearly. I certainly saw her clearly. So clearly, I could smell her and feel her breath. I particularly noticed the volume of air that she breathed. Not out of breath or even heavy breathing, just a large volume of air with each breath. I again smiled at her and asked, "Is the baby okay?" She slowly smiled back at me. I noticed a dental anomaly. Either she had a double row of teeth, or the crowns of her teeth were split on the top center to give the impression of 2 rows of teeth. She then reached into the tractor and stroked my beard, like I do when I'm thinking. My beard is mid-chest length and multicolor. It was then I realized the large male's head was identical to mine, although his beard was shorter. The female had thin facial hair on her chin. The rest of his fur was dark brown with traces of gray and white on his shoulders, back, and chest. She was a mixture of brown and reddish fur, mostly reddish-brown. As she took her hand off my beard and took her hand out of my tractor, I extended my hand out to her. She sandwiched my hand between her 2 hands, and her 2 hands were easily 2 to 3 times bigger than mine. Her hands felt like roughneck work gloves or rough leather. At this point, she gave me a soulful look. From her facial expressions and her watery eyes, I took what she was saying. "Thank you for not running over my baby." The eyes were not dead eyes. They were bright and moist, just very dark brown, but not black. The large male had the child under his arm, like a sack of potatoes. He never looked directly at me as I watched him walk back into the tree line. I noticed at least 3 more, I suspected even more, at the tree line. They ranged from the height of a female to slightly shorter, but none came close to the size of the male.